Today's passage is from Habakkuk, chapter 1, verse 5 to chapter 2, verse 1. Please follow along in your Bible, and the reading will also be on the screen. It's quite long. Look at the nations and watch, and be utterly amazed, for I am going to do something in your days that you would not believe, even if you were told. I'm raising up the Babylonians, that the ruthless and impetuous people who sweep across the whole earth to seize dwellings not their own. They had a feared and dreaded people. They are a law to themselves and promote their own honor. Their horses are swifter than leopards, fiercer than wolves at dusk. Their cavalry gallops headlong, their horseman comes from afar. They fly like an eagle, swooping to devour, for they all intent of violence. Their hordes advances like a desert wind and gather prisoners like sand. They mock kings and scoff at rulers. They laugh at fortified cities. By building earthen ramps, they capture them. Then they sweep past like the wind and go on, guilty people whom own strength is their God. Lord, are you not from everlasting? My God, my Holy One, you will never die. You, Lord, have appointed them to execute judgment. You, my rock, have ordained them to punish. Your eyes are too pure to look on evil. You cannot tolerate wrongdoing. Why then do you tolerate the treacherous? Why are you silent while the wicked swallow up those more righteous than themselves? You have made people like the fish in the sea, like the sea creatures that have no ruler. The wicked foe pulls all of them up with hooks. He catches them in his net. He gathers them up in this dragnet, and so he replaces and is glad. Therefore he sacrifices to his net and burns incense to his dragnet. For by his net he lives in luxury and enjoys the choicest food. Is he keep on emptying the net, destroying nations without mercy? I will stand at my watch and station myself on the ramparts. I will look to see what he will say to me and what answer I am to give to this complaint. This is the word of God. Now I'd like to invite Andrew Drury, who will explain God's words to us.
Thanks, Andy. Excellent work. I would not have picked it was your first time. You're doing such a great job. So thanks for leading us this morning. And a good morning to everybody else here. And what an interesting passage and an amazing book. Habakkuk. Just reading that passage, I'm just thinking, it just doesn't make sense. There are things in life that don't make sense. A 2006 romantic comedy called The Breakup featured a couple named Gary and Brooke who decide to move in together. Tensions run high between Gary and Brooke and boil over following a dinner party where Gary fails to help Brooke, at her request, to clean the dishes. They enter into a heated argument, very confused by the other person and pouring out their complaints to each other. So Gary gives in, throws his gaming controller on the ground and reluctantly says to Brooke, "Fine, I'll help you do the damn dishes." Brooke is very displeased with this response and seemingly contradicts herself, saying, that's not what I want. Then came the pivotal moment in their argument when Brooke says to Gary, "I want you to want to do the dishes." And Gary retorts with, "Why would I want to do the dishes?" I can tell you, I'm sure every guy watching this scene is thinking, he is absolutely right. What is wrong with her? And yet at the same time, I'm sure every girl watching this exact same scene is thinking, she is absolutely right. What is wrong with him? There are things in life that just don't make sense. It is confusing. I am complaining. Life shouldn't be this way. The prophet Habakkuk is very confused by God's actions, and he is complaining about what he sees. He's complaining to God about what he sees. We'll look at today's passage broadly in two sections, confusing and complaining. Sounds like a wonderful sermon ahead of us. We'll see. God's actions appear confusing and Habakkuk is complaining. He is wrestling with God. However, in this passage, we can learn more about who God is and how to complain well. So, let's start with section 1, the confusion. To do this, we need to do a quick recap of the preceding verses and the big picture of the first two chapters. So, in chapters 1 and 2, Habakkuk presents two complaints directed to God, between each of which God answers. In last week's passage, we learnt about Habakkuk's doubt in God's goodness in his first complaint. Today's passage begins with God's answer to that complaint, which leads to Habakkuk's second complaint, completing today's passage. You'll have to return next week to hear God's answer to Habakkuk's second complaint. So what was Habakkuk's first complaint? Habakkuk says to God, "Look." Verse 3, "Why do you make me look at injustice? Why do you tolerate wrong?" Habakkuk is looking around him where violence and injustice abound. The law of God is ignored. But Habakkuk is confused because it also seems that God is ignoring his own law and allowing the violence and injustice to prevail. He is saying, "God, can't you see what I see?" Verse 2, "How long, O Lord, must I call for help, but you do not listen, or cry out to you, violence, but you do not save?" Habakkuk is doubting God's goodness, confused by what he sees, and therefore brings his complaint to God. So now we come to God's first answer, which is the start of today's passage. God says to Habakkuk, "Look," verse 5, "Look at the nations and watch, and be utterly amazed, for I am going to do something in your days that you would not believe even if you were told." Wow, this is something big. This is something that will involve many nations. Whatever this is, it'll be one of those historical events that will be remembered for centuries. So what is this amazing thing that God is going to do? What could be so amazing that if someone told me, I would not believe it? Verse 6, "I am raising up the Babylonians, that ruthless and impetuous people that sweep across the whole earth to seize dwellings not their own." If Habakkuk was confused before God's answer, he's now even more confused after God's answer. It's like when you're in a lecture at uni and you ask the lecturer a question only to be given an answer that makes you even more confused and creating even more questions. What is God saying here? It just doesn't make sense. God seems to be saying, "I see the violence and injustice of my people, the Israelites, and I am preparing your enemies, the Babylonians, to come and take your land to bring about justice." Habakkuk must be deeply puzzled, thinking, "God, I told you to look and you looked. You told me to look and I looked. And the thing I'm looking at looks like a Picasso painting. It just doesn't make sense. In fact, it's a little terrifying. To better understand this, we need a brief history lesson on the Israelites. And I'm stealing some of Barsley's work from last week. King David was the peak period of the Israelites, the golden age, and then it went downhill towards the end of his son's Solomon's reign. After him, the nation was divided into two kingdoms, the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom. Each kingdom with a line of increasingly worse kings, and the Israelite people were increasingly corrupt, except for a few good kings such as King Josiah and King Hezekiah. By Habakkuk's time, the 10 tribes that made up the northern kingdom had fallen to the Assyrians, and now God is saying the 2 remaining tribes of the southern kingdom will fall to the latest superpower, the Babylonians. The prophet Habakkuk is in such disbelief. Not only is God using their enemies, the Babylonians, to bring justice against his people, but his people will no longer have their own kingdom. They will no longer have their own land. They will no longer have their own king. They are essentially being wiped out. What Habakkuk might have expected God to say is, I will raise up a great king, like that of King Josiah, who will re-establish justice in our courts, end the violence in our land, and teach the people the law that brings freedom, that you may live a righteous and prosperous life once again. But there was no such promise this time for Habakkuk and the people of Israel. God would deal with the violence and injustice of the Israelites by bringing the Babylonians to wipe them out. God doesn't stop there. That's just the first verse. For the rest of his answer, he proceeds to spell out just how powerful the Babylonian army is. It is bad enough to hear that your enemies are going to overthrow you, but did God really need to point out just how big and scary they are? They instill fear in their enemies, verse 7. They are a law to themselves, verse 7. Their horses and cavalry are compared to the speed of leopards, the ferociousness of wolves, the attack of a vulture, verse 8. All bent on violence, verse 9. They gather prisoners like sand, verse 9, and they mock kings, verse 10. Taking over a city of another nation is so easy for them. The fortified walls are as easy as walking over level ground. Verse 10 reads, they laugh at fortified cities. By building earthen ramps, they capture them. Fortified walls are a key defense tool for protecting the inhabitants of a city, but to the Babylonians, they are as good as non-existent. They build earthen ramps, or rather, they dump large amounts of dirt against the wall to then comfortably walk up and down the ramp of dirt into the city and overthrow it. Such is the might of the Babylonians. So that is the confusion. Habakkuk sees violence and injustice abound among his people, and confusingly, God seems to be absent. God says, I'm not absent, and that he's raising up the powerful Babylonians to bring about justice against his people. So Habakkuk is even more confused. Which brings us to section 2, the complaint. So this is Habakkuk's second complaint. Habakkuk is understandably feeling very uneasy about God's answer. Out of all the answers God could have given, this was definitely something hard to believe. It was a hard pill to swallow. But here is an extraordinary lesson in how to complain well. The way Habakkuk wrestles with God, the way he complains is in the form of a lament. Complaining is often done in a negative way, and therefore it makes it a negative attribute. Lamenting, on the other hand, is to complain well, making it a positive attribute. What's the difference between complaining and lamenting? It is grumbling versus inquiring. It is venting versus voicing. It is expressing dissatisfaction versus expressing grief. That's not necessarily to say that the dissatisfaction is entirely absent. Habakkuk is dissatisfied about the violence and injustice, and he brings this complaint before God. But a lament is more mature. Habakkuk isn't just dissatisfied, he is grieved at the violence and injustice. He isn't just grumbling, he isn't just venting, he is inquiring, he is voicing. So Habakkuk is lamenting and not merely complaining. So what can we learn from Habakkuk's lament about how to complain well? How should we wrestle with God? We complain well by remembering who God is. Verse 12, Lord, are you not from everlasting? My God, my Holy One, we will never die. There is a lot packed into this verse, and some Bibles have you will never die. For brevity, I am going to stick with we will never die. Habakkuk appeals to God's eternal nature being attached to the Israelites' eternal existence. Or more accurately, vice versa, if God is everlasting, then surely the people of Israel will be everlasting as he sustains them. Habakkuk is remembering who God is, the everlasting one. Continuing in verse 12, O Lord, you have appointed them to execute judgment. O rock, you have ordained them to punish. In the midst of accepting this difficult news, he calls God by his personal name, Yahweh, rendered as Lord in small caps in our Bibles, and refers to him as a rock. Yahweh is the God who promised the Israelites through Abraham that they would have a land of their own and that they would have many descendants. A rock is a frequently used imagery of God, considering him to be a firm foundation. That firm foundation is his unchanging nature and his sure promises. Habakkuk still believes in God's nature and promises based on what he knows from the scriptures as he has it so far. He is struggling, wrestling to reconcile what he knows about God against his immediate circumstance. To reconcile God saying that the Babylonians will essentially wipe out the remaining tribes of the Israelites, with the promise that the Israelites will be a great ongoing nation. Habakkuk is remembering who God is. He is the God of Abraham, the solid rock. Verse 13, your eyes are too pure to look on evil. You cannot tolerate wrong. Why then do you tolerate the treacherous? Why are you silent while the wicked swallow up those more righteous than themselves? Even in his questions, Habakkuk continues to speak truths about God. He knows God does not tolerate wrong. He knows God does not remain silent while the wicked prosper. He knows this because God has taken action against the wicked as they have popped up for many centuries now. He implicitly remembers who God is, the one who brings justice against the wicked. And for the remainder of chapter 1, he laments how the wicked worship their source of prosperity as their God, just like a fisherman who worships his fishing net that brings him wealth, and not the God who created the fish or the net. He remembers who God is. He is the creator. And after bringing his second complaint before God, in chapter 2, verses 1, he says to himself, I will stand at my watch and station myself on the ramparts. I will look to see what he will say to me and what answer I am to give to this complaint. Someone who complains well doesn't just unload and walk away. They make their complaint and then they wait and listen with an open mind. Habakkuk illustrates this posture much like a sentry, a soldier standing atop a fortified wall, keeping both a keen eye and a sharp ear for any enemies that may come. However, in this case, he is preparing himself for Yahweh's second response. And much like the first sight of the enemy, and much like God's first answer, it may not be the kind of answer he wants to hear, but the kind of answer he needs to hear. When you visit the doctor feeling unwell, you don't want to hear that you need surgery, but you need to hear it if surgery is what you need to make you better. So that is the complaint. Habakkuk is complaining well. He is complaining well by remembering who God is, by lamenting the fallen state of his people, and by waiting and listening with an open mind. It would be so much easier if the line dividing good and evil was between the Israelites and the Babylonians. We are the good guys, they are the bad guys. Why couldn't God just unite the people of Israel around a cause to bring justice against the ruthless Babylonians? This misses the entire point. This misses the problem presented in the book of Habakkuk. The problem isn't us versus them. The problem is just us. The problem is internal, not external. The problem is the people of Israel, not the Babylonians. The problem is the violence and injustice of the Israelites, not the lawlessness of the Babylonians. The Babylonians, as terrible as they are, did not cause the Israelite people to become corrupt. The Israelites became corrupt themselves. The cause of the problem is just us. We are still the same today. We tend to fall into a tribal mentality. My family, my team, my country, it is us versus them. Who are the more righteous ones? No one's perfect, but at least we are better than you. My team didn't have to cheat to get to the top. My country doesn't have all the problems your country has. My business acts honestly and doesn't use deception. There may or may not be one side that is more righteous or even significantly more righteous than the other. But you can be sure of this, that the line dividing good and evil cuts through the heart of every human being. Those who were here last week may notice I'm stealing more work from Andrew Barsley. Great work, Andrew. But this presents the problem in Habakkuk so well. Alexander Solzhenitsyn was imprisoned in the dreadful gulags during the Soviet Union era. In the gulags, many of the prisoners were put in charge of their fellow prisoners. But far from being sympathetic, many were brutal to their fellow prisoners. During this time, Solzhenitsyn, reflecting on this and his life, had to come to terms with his own role in his own demise. As much as he wanted life to be so simple, to be able to say, they are the enemies, we are the good guys, he concluded with the famous quote that the line dividing good and evil cuts through the heart of every human being. This is extraordinary from a man who would have seen horrific evils and could have concluded that these people, the oppressed, are more righteous than those people, the oppressors. Instead, he saw that everyone had a heart with a mix of good and evil. The reason why Habakkuk was wrestling so much with God is because this was an internal battle within Israel. The Israelites would have to come to terms with their own role in their own demise. And just like any other corrupt nation, God would bring justice against them. It is difficult for us to accept the reality of our own shortcomings. It is easier to always blame everything else out there. But in the end, we must deal with the problem in here, in our hearts. What are these things within our hearts that we are struggling with? Well, you'll have to come back next week to learn more about the 5 woes. So that's today's passage. It is confusing, but it does make sense. I am complaining, but God is in control. The important thing isn't that I understand the details. The important thing is knowing that God is in control. A toddler might be afraid of the dark, of loud noises, of unfamiliar places. It is confusing, they are complaining. They may not even be capable of understanding what is happening around them. But the important thing is that mummy and daddy understand what is happening and that they are in control. The problem is ourselves. The answer is God. We need a powerful Babylonian army to wipe out the evil in our hearts. Let us remember who God is as we lament our shortcomings and seek freedom in the law of God.